happy to see you. After the gala dinner, I wasn't expecting so many people, so I think that it means the topic is interesting to you. And as mentioned by Steinley, the paper that I am presenting today is about the contribution of energy-efficient glazing to energy savings and cutting CO2 emission in the European Union. So as you know, there's been the Paris Agreement. The European Union is one of the signatories of the Paris Agreement, and the decision makers at the moment in Europe are looking into how to reduce the CO2 emission in the different sectors. So here is a couple of figures on buildings. Buildings are responsible for 40% of the energy consumption in Europe, 36% of the CO2 emission. Needless to say that if we want to reduce the emission in the European Union, the building sector is one of the key sectors where actions will need to be taken. So at the moment, you have a legislation which is for the nearly zero energy buildings, for the new buildings or new construction. It will apply as of next year, and all the building newly constructed will have to be passive. Now, the European Commission released in November last year in-depth analysis of a document called A Clean Planet for All, where different options are considered for reducing the emission in the different sector. And clearly in the building sector, the legislator considered that the main challenge will be with the renovation of the existing building stock. Because if you take the building stock from today until 2050, there is an estimate that 97% of this building stock will have to be renovated by 2050. And not only by increasing the renovation rate, because today we are at around 0.5 and 1% renovation rate annually in Europe. So we need at least to double or triple it to get to the 97%. But on top of that, renovation needs to be with performance products, very performant product, if we are aiming at cutting the emission in the building sector. So as flat glass industry, knowing that there is all this discussion, debate on how do we do it, we thought with the companies that I'm representing that we really need to look into what is our contribution, what could be our contribution, what is the performance of different glazing that can be equipped today in the future, and by how much is it going to reduce the emission in the building stock. So all started in March last year when we decided to create a map, a picture, looking into the different countries in Europe and what is today the average performance of the glazing installed in all the buildings per country. So here you have a map, you have other information. This map is actually on our website. And we looked into different sources. In November, when the Commission, the legislator, released its Clean Planet for All, good news was that our estimate matched the one from different sources from the legislator. And this is the figure which is the most striking. Actually, today in Europe, the average value, U-window value of in the building stock is of 3.4. So I know you are all very familiar with the glass, but this presentation, I made it in a different setup. And so we created a visual to explain to people what we are talking about. What we are talking about is a product from the 60s, 70s. I mean, it's single glazing or double uncoated. This is the average performance of the windows that are in the building in Europe. Why? Why? How come that we have such a figure? Building stock is aged, This is really a characteristic of the European building stock. The renovation rate has been extremely low. I just mentioned it for the last years. And we can see, when looking a little bit into the market, that the uptake of the highly performant glazing has been quite low in the most important segment, which is the residential renovation. All this explains that we have a very high figure for the average U window. So that's the bad news. Good news means that when we made that assessment, we thought, okay, there is a potential there. If we have such a bad average, if we equip with the products, the buildings with the products we have today, we must be able to grasp important savings. So we asked TNO, which is a research institute based in the Netherlands, to create a model to make this estimate. So I'm going to explain to you very quickly how this model works. It was actually a very interesting work because it's about looking into the past. So typically, what were the windows installed over the last years? The present, what is the impact it has today? What are the products available today? And what will happen in the future if we increase the renovation rate with energy-efficient products, or if we replace all windows? But I will come back to it to assess the potential. So the TNO modeling works like a picture. We define today EU building stock, looking into what is the floor area in the different countries, what is the building type, different building types. So here you have dwellings, apartments, non-residential building, all of them with their characteristics depending on their location in the country, when they were built. All these information are create a picture of today building stock. And you have, of course, the insulation performance of roof, facade, floor, and windows, which we provided. You have, does it appear? No. There are other variables as well. And that is something I'm going to explain, because at one point you have to translate the energy savings into CO2 savings. And there it's very important to have the right energy mix depending on the countries, because it really varies from one to the other. So that gives you the picture of today. So you have the European building stock. Once you have this picture, what we did was to create a baseline, which is about having the same building stock, having it evolving until 2030 and 2050 with minimal changes. New construction, demolition, heating and cooling system that are changing because you have more efficient heating system, you have more cooling system in the building stock based on studies from the International Energy Agency, and you increase the share of renewables. This is a trend there in Europe, and you have different objectives that are set for the member states to have more renewables in their grid. So that gives you the energy consumption of your building stock in 2030, 2050. So you make the evolution from today, from the picture of today, and you have two new pictures, which is basically what is the consumption. Okay? Yes? Once you have done that, what you do is to change only one parameter. Same picture, same new construction, demolition, but you change the window without touching any other building element, really to focus on what is the impact of changing the window in all the building stock. So once you have done that, you have a new energy consumption. So you are comparing the first picture with the second, where you only change the window. One minus the other gives you the energy savings. And to translate those energy savings, it's quite simple. You use the energy mix of the different countries. So you multiply it by the CO2 per kilowatt hour in the different country. So that gives you the figures that I will present to you in a few minutes. So I said we need to change the window, so we had to define the windows. So there are two scenarios. One which is until 2030, a second one which is till 2050. So you can see there are U and G values because the modeling takes into account the energy balance, so the heat gains and the insulation performance of the window. So that's the reason why you have those two values. So what we did was to create a mix of products, and basically we install them in the different buildings depending on their location, on the orientation of the building, and with products that are available today for until 2030. For 2030, 2050, we had to create products. We made them based on projections that exist, research which is done by the different members of Glass for Europe, and we decided to exclude typically the evolutive window or the windows with BIPV, just not to be accused by some to inflate the figure. So that gives us, that's the window that we are equipping in the different buildings, and I'm going to show you what's the impact of it. So the key findings can be found in a study, in the TNO report, which was published this year. Yeah, there is a lot of figures, but there is a slide to explain them. It was just to let you know that the report is available if you want to look into the figures. You just have to send me an email, and I will be happy to share it. So what are the figures telling us? So we have three scenarios. One where we change all the window in the building stock in 2030. So with the window value I showed you before. The second one, same, in 2050. Third one, which is quite interesting, is we played on the renovation rate. So what we did is to have a 1% renovation rate of window annually, targeting the worst performing segment over 10 years, from 2020 to 2030. And that allowed us to play on an increase of the renovation rate. You remember at the beginning of my presentation, I explained that this is what the legislator is looking into at the moment in Europe. And these are the savings. They are massive. 2030, if you change all window in the building stock, you can save 29% energy consumption in the European building stock. It's a very impressive figure for a building element alone, because we only change the windows. In 2050, it's 37%. 37% of the building stock. Interestingly, when we apply what the European Commission said that it is considering for the building stock, so doubling the renovation rate, focusing on the least performance segment of the building stock, and installing highly energy efficient products, which I presented to you, you actually get 50% of the maximum theoretical figures that I show you. So actually, those potential are there. If Europe does what is considered at the moment by the legislator, it could go up to 50% of those 30% savings in 2030. Very, very important figure. One element which is to be taken into consideration as well, because when we did the modeling, it was clear that in 2050, with the increase of buildings equipped with a cooling system, the moderation of the cooling demand will also need special attention. And we know that there are products, glass products, that allow to moderate the overheating in the buildings, and we use them in our calculation model, and it really helped to moderate this increase in demand, in energy demand. So the challenge is now, how do we make it? So since we are based in Brussels, talking directly to the decision makers, we came with different policy recommendations to make it happen. First being, we need to put energy efficiency first in the building sector. There are a lot of discussion going on if you go for more renewables, it might be enough to cut the emission in Europe in the building sector and in other sectors because you are going for green electricity, for instance. When we did the modeling using the projection on renewable and nuclear, phasing out coal in the countries, we could see that it was not enough. I mean, this statement that it will be enough to go for green energy to cut emission, it's partly true, but it's definitely not enough. And cutting the energy consumption in the building will be key. Second element is we definitely don't have to delay measures. They have to happen now because of the lifetime of a window. If the products are not highly performant, we will have a lock-in effect. Because those windows that will be installed tomorrow, they will still be there in 2050. And if Europe goes for carbon neutrality, as they are contemplating it at the moment, it will not happen. Third point, I already mentioned it. I'm not going to spend too much time. We need to increase the renovation rate. I mean, the potential is there. It's there as well because things did not happen in terms of renovation so far. So if we do it, we have to increase the renovation rate of window. Then we need to have this uptake of highly performant product. There are different ways of doing it. In Europe, we have these minimum performance requirements for windows. They exist for new buildings, but they exist as well for building elements when they are replaced. And we know that and I presented a paper 2 years ago presenting what is today the minimum performance requirements in the different countries. We know that they are not ambitious in most countries. And it's under discussion at the moment. The countries have to review them until next year. So there is a window of opportunity to be more ambitious on the minimum performance requirements. Of course, there are other mechanisms that could be used. Financial incentives are typically one which works quite well. I'm from Belgium, so I know the Belgian system, and I could see how many people changed their windows where there were this type of subsidies for the people. More information to the consumer. I mean, there are different ways of making it happen. So we are promoting all these messages in Brussels. We have edited a brochure that you can find on our website. I've focused my presentation really on the European Union figures, so Europe figures. Now you will find more information on the website, and in particular, you can find the same information per country. Because when we did the modeling, we took the different parameters of each country, and so you can see what are the savings, for instance, if you do exactly these type of scenarios in France, Germany, United Kingdom, for instance. Voilà, I give you more time for questions and answer. Thank you. And as I said, you will find the information on our website, which is there, and don't hesitate to send me an email if you want any additional information.
Thank you very much, Cédric.
My pleasure.
That's a wonderful and informative presentation on the current status of activities, legislative activities to benefit energy efficiency in glass and glazing. Do we have any questions from the audience for Cédric? I'll just give you a microphone here.
Thank you for a very informative presentation. I understood what you say, but I don't understand what our city councils and our government of Finland is saying. So basically, from your presentation, I understand that there is a tendency to respect the existing building stock. But at the moment, especially here in Finland, there is a tendency to say that the lifespan of a building has been just reached. It's about 20 years ago that the building was built, so it has to be demolished because it is so much more efficient to build a brand new building. So it seems as if basically everything has to be torn down because of the energy efficiency requirements. That is at least the way it's been explained to us. So can you elaborate a little bit of the research, or does the research say something about the overall energy saving, or if we think about circular economy, because basically if there is still the whole entire building that has to be rebuilt in order to have the same functions available, then common sense says that there is much more material, there's much more design, there's much more construction, and basically building a new building should be theoretically, according to common sense, much more, let's say, or much less sustainable.
It's it's a very good question. Research, I don't know if there are research that are comparing, yes, I mean, for the performance of a new building or one which is going to be retrofitted, it depends obviously on the type of renovation you are doing, the different building elements that you are renovating, the sequencing. There are a number of variables that have to be taken into consideration. This said, something which I find quite interesting is the idea of demolishing a building to build a new one with the idea that this is going to be more sustainable. And there I think that there is room for studies to look into what will be the carbon footprint if you do that. Because there will be different building elements, the building materials that will have to be built. You will have to recycle, of course, what has been demolished. And I think that if you look into a life cycle assessment, I'm not quite sure that it serves the objective of reduction of emissions, because somehow you will have to do it. So I don't know if I answered to your question. I'm afraid I don't have studies that are comparing on top of my mind, but I can try to look into this.
Yes, thank you for the great presentation.
Thank you.
Fantastic information. You were talking financial incentives because, I mean, there's some grand goals to achieve here, but there's such, large disparities in wealth between the different EU nations, and I see this as a big stumbling block. Is there some sort of strategy the European Commission has to make sure that you could say, poorer countries in the Union can afford to provide these incentives?
Yes. No. No.
Okay.
No. No. There is no specific fund or anything of the kind that the European Commission gives to countries to make it happen. It's really up to the different countries to take the decision to have this type of schemes, and even in some countries, it's one region which is giving it and not another. It's quite fragmented. There is no decision taken at a upper level to apply to everybody. No.
We'll take one more here.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Cédric. I think it's important we have this topic in our conference, especially for people that have less white hair than others. Two questions. Actually, the first one is a kind of remark. France used to have subsidies to help, private, dwellings to improve their thermal performance.
Yes.
Yeah, last year you were able to do that. They stopped doing it. The Paris Agreement, right? It doesn't make much sense. So I really, I would like you to keep lobbying in Brussels so that you can get this back. So not only the countries, poorer countries of the EU might be struggling with those things, but France is probably not in that category, and they're seized subsidizing dwellings improvements. So I think it's a very odd message. And second one is, well, actually, I can let you reply to that one if you have any further comments.
On this one, well, thank you, because it means that what we are doing, it's needed.
Or not working.
And it's part of the messages that we are passing, indeed. And I think that it's somehow related to what I was referring to before, with these trade-offs that can happen between the production of green electricity. Typically, you still have subsidies that apply for renewables, and then a country is just doing its budget and decides to cut where they already subsidized. And that's exactly the kind of trade-offs that shall not happen if you want to go for zero emission. And that's exactly the type of message that shall be passed in the different countries. Now, we do have associated members that are from the French Association, and I know that they are quite active on the topic to try to get it back.
And the last one, we have some US attendance here. Maybe we can hope that there's some similar lobbying or research in the US that you could share with us.
Actually, I don't know. Maybe you know, Stanley.
I was kind of afraid you'd. The answer is there is activity. The landscape in North America is a little bit more complex. It is straightforward. I do want to close out by thanking you for bringing us the European perspective here at GPD. I certainly believe, to Sophie's point over here, that there's room for more dialogue, more legislation, maybe financial incentives, maybe, but we already know within this room that status quo is just not good enough, right? I think we can all agree on that. Interesting lead in which Europe is taking, the European Union is taken, and I think it just begs to ask the question of ourselves. We're ready for this paradigm shift, and we're ready to start imparting change. And sometimes that takes us within the industry. So, Sophie, to answer your question in North America, is any action being taken? Yeah, there's some action, but is there enough? Is there legislation? Is there funding? Is there the technology available? Are the resources available? Or those studies to validate and address and to inform the public, hey, we need to do this? And the answer is yes, no, and maybe. But it does boil down to action needs to be taken, and it can start here with your study. And perhaps, Sophie, we can have a conversation later about, and Helen, I know you're actively involved in this industry as well, or anybody else in this room, is we can start having that dialogue. And we need to start having that dialogue to start pushing for action. Because if we just continue to sit on our hands and wait for something to happen, it's not likely going to happen. And that's why we're here, and that's why we're going to enjoy the rest of this Glass and Sustainability session today. We're going to thank Cédric for his great presentation. He will be around for the morning for more questions and answers.
Hi there. Did you like what you just saw? If you did, why don't you like the video, drop us a comment below, and share the video as well, since GPD is all about sharing. And to receive more videos in future, subscribe to this channel and don't forget to click the bell icon. Ciao!